You are watching Web of Faith 2.1 and a half, presented by Father John Trujillo and Father Kenneth Briganti. We are happy you will be joining us. And now, without further ado, Father Kenneth Briganti and Father John Trujillo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Web of Faith 2.1 and a half. As we all know, we're in quarantine now, so we thought we'd bring our regular show, which airs on Saturdays on EWTN, Web of Faith 2.0 at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, sort of special editions to you here in Flemington, New Jersey. So in a short while, we'll be putting an email up there. If you have any questions, theological, religious, liturgical, or even canonical or moral, you can definitely send it into that email, and we will be happy to entertain those questions for you on this show. I am joined here by my illustrious colleague.
Yes, Father John Trujillo, Diocese of Harrisburg, and also Director of Pastoral Formation at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
And we are celebrating a milestone in Father Trujillo's life today. It's his 58th birthday.
Yeah.
So congratulations, Father, and
thank you.
Many more to you. What a nice way to celebrate it in quarantine.
Yes.
Well, at least you're amongst friends.
Well, as I told somebody the other day, this is our virus version of our show.
That's right. But it'll come to your computer
sanitized,
right, antivirus, right? Yeah.
Completely sanitized.
All right, dear Father Trujillo, thank you for all you do for us on EWTN and your many books that you have written. To say the least, you have contributed to the evangelization movement. My question is this: what vestments are required for a priest to say Mass, and where did they originated? Signed, Camille.
Well, Camille, if you notice, it's particularly in the Latin Rite, because that's where Father Briganti and I belong to, and most of the people watching the show, although the Byzantine or Eastern Catholic Church has similar vestments. But if you go to our book, the Catholic Mass for Dummies, and also in Catholicism for Dummies, we explain the different Eastern Catholic Church traditions. But for the Latin Rite, the priest typically will wear at least a minimum an alb, which is the white part, and that's why it's called the alb, from albus, meaning white. And that's the typical vestment for ordained ministers. So the priest, the deacon, the bishop would typically wear an alb. Now, priests like Father Ken and I might wear an alb over our cassock, or you could wear over your clerical clothing. But the alb is the minimum that should be worn. Now, underneath the alb could be worn an amice, which goes over the shoulders, and it has a practical purpose. It absorbs the perspiration, but also it represents putting on the helmet of salvation. And there's some wonderful prayers. I remember, Father Briganti, you had them printed out for your seminarians when you were in the seminary.
And they're also in our sacristy, too. Most sacristies have them, but the amice also had a practical purpose back in the Middle Ages. We're getting natural tonsures up here, losing our hair, but they used to have in the clerical state a tonsure, which they would literally shave this big circle over here. And of course, there was no central heating back in the Middle Ages, and so the little tonsure got a little cold there. So they would make the amice sort of like a hood. And at certain points in the liturgy, they would just raise the amice up over their tonsure, which kept them warm. So that was another purpose of the amice.
And that points out another good thing, that a lot of these traditions, especially liturgically, had both a practical and a symbolic dimension to it. The chasuble that goes over the alb, and just before that, the stole is worn. The priest's stole hangs parallel. The deacon's stole goes at a diagonally. In the extraordinary form, the priest used to cross his stole like an X, and only the bishop wore it parallel. But now, since we have the ordinary form, the Novus Ordo, the priest and the bishop wear it the same way. The stole represents the office of priesthood or holy orders. The alb represents that you're a minister of the church. The chasuble is that colorful vestment that's worn over the alb. For the deacon, it looks very similar, but it has sleeves, and it matches the colors, and it's called a dalmatic. but the priest and the bishop wear the chasuble, which goes back to Roman times, which was basically, that was the typical cloak that the Roman man would wear out in public. And
especially like a Roman nobility.
yes, and the colors, like in Roman times, purple meant that you were either a member of the Senate or you were the imperial family. And so the colors represent different things. The white, obviously, the one that's the most common, can be worn on big holy days, celebrating the feast of our Lord and the Blessed Mother, St. Joseph. It's a very festive color, and so we wear it Easter and Christmas.
But to interject that, though, there are different styles of chasubles, and you probably, if you've been tuning in to Mass here at St. Mary Magdalene's, you've been seeing 3 different styles of vestments. Father Trigilio has been wearing what we call the Gothic vestment. There is the full Gothic, and which Spencer makes the full Gothic. It's almost monastic. It's so big.
Too long for me.
Father's wearing a modified Gothic. Then there is the Roman fiddleback, and Father Matthew today wore the Roman fiddleback, and then I wore the Spanish version of the of that type of vestment. It's a little bit straighter instead of the fiddleback looked like a fiddle. Okay, they were popular in the time right after the Reformation. Ignatius of Loyola and Philip Neri sort of championed those type of styles, the fiddleback and the Spanish style one of the vestment. That fiddleback is also called the Roman vestment, I should say, and they kind of fell out of style after the 1960s. The Gothic was the one that was mostly worn because the older style, the Roman style vestment, was looked upon, used a lot at the extraordinary form of the Mass, or the Mass of 1962, or the Tridentine, sometimes it's called. And so they, even though the Roman or the Gothic vestment was also used at that time too, so it was not exclusive at that from that period. And just so these styles are still valid to be worn today, and that's why you'll see all 3 of them be done. I preferably like to use the Roman style during the week, and then I like to use the Gothic style on the weekend. But then I also have some very beautiful old Gothic or fiddleback styles, Roman style, gold ones that I like to use on festival occasions. They're antique ones, and but all are valid and all are good. There's also in the extraordinary form a little cloth that's worn over the hand. It's called a manipule.
Looks like a mini stole.
Right, and it comes into, and again, it matches the colors of the vestment. Another vestment in the old rite would be a tunic, and the tunic was for the subdiaconate. So they just didn't have, like deacons have 2 lines, and I think the tunic only has 1 line.
It looked much like a dalmatic.
Right.
But the design on the front is what was different.
Exactly, and I don't think they wore a stole either, the subdeacon either.
No.
So that would be the other difference too. And then, of course, then you had the dalmatic of the deacon in the office, and he wore a manipule as well, and then the priest as well. So now today we only have the dalmatic, and we have the chasuble. But interesting to know, Father, before you continue, bishops are supposed to, in high pontifical liturgies, wear the dalmatic and then the chasuble. And then, of course, their pectoral cloths, that's a symbol of their office. And the mitre, of course, which Father will explain in a second, is because they have the fullness of holy orders. So as an expression of the fullness of holy orders, they would wear all those vestments. And albeit the dalmatic would be very paper thin because,
it would get hot.
It can get very warm. And so our bishop wears it like when he's ordaining priests. He'll wear it at the Chrism Mass. He'll wear it, very formal and special occasions. If he comes out to our parish for confirmation, he not necessarily wears the dalmatic underneath the chasuble. He doesn't have to. Tell him about the cincture.
The cincture had a practical purpose. It gathered your alb together so you weren't flopping all over the place. And they also held the stole in place too, so that wasn't sliding around.
Because again, the priests used to hold the stole this
Yes,
way,
and
especially
it
with
wouldn't
Roman
stay.
vestments. It hides a certain section.
There was
up
no
there.
Velcro in the old days. So the cincture had a practical purpose, but symbolically, when you put on the cincture, you also had a prayer that you said for an increase of purity. And it was like the girdle of purity. Not girdle, as many people think of it today, but the original aspect of that word meant to wrap around a rope.
And not for nothing. Don't we think we need that even more nowadays?
Well, especially, I said, interesting enough, since they got rid of the cincture for the most part, a lot of the sexual scandals in the church, not that had anything to do with it, but it's just sort of ironic that the symbol of purity disappeared just as we saw the flaring up of such decadence in the clergy. So the cincture is not mandatory, but it has a practical and symbolic value. And again, the colors of the cincture can match the colors of the vestments or a simple white cincture. And obviously the priest, the deacon, the bishop, even altar servers now sometimes wear these cinctures. The ones you see that look like a Franciscan robe, those are considered cinctures. But technically speaking,
that's part of their habit.
Yes,
because you'll see 3 knots on there for chastity, poverty, and obedience that they take as vows. Okay,
Yeah.
Now diocesan priests don't take those vows, but we are called to live those vows in simplicity of life. Chastity would be our celibacy as well, because you need to be chaste in order to be celibate, right? And simplicity corresponds with poverty, and of course obedience. We take obedience first when we're ordained a deacon to our bishop and his successors, and to the Holy Father, and then and so obedience is and then re-emphasized again at priesthood too. So even though we formally, like the Franciscans, wear it in the knot, we of course all abide by the same type of principles.
So the bare minimum, a priest should have an alb, a stole, and a chasuble. And then optionally, you might see a cincture on top of the alb and an amice underneath the alb, covering up the Roman collar.
Right, and there's a lot of chit-chat about what kind of albs. Now you'll probably see on special festival occasions an alb that has a lot of what they call lace in it. And in fact, a friend of ours used to say that my first mass, and I wore this really very intricate lace. It was all made in Venice. And it says that my mother was envious to have that on her table because it was so much lace on there. Obviously, those
had
are
more than your mother did. On the
obviously, you
dining
wear
table.
something like that around Easter and Christmas time, and certain special occasions. And then there's a simpler one, you wear in Lent and Advent, and then there's a time for a regular one, that you would wear. And I always tell the seminarians that they should have a few albs because some of them need to be cleaned. And so you need to have another alb to replace that, and maybe one that you might have just for summer, and then which is a little bit lighter, cooler, and then one that you would wear in the winter that might be a little bit warmer, made out of wool. You might also see now the new style, which is the Roman style after the council, the square. It looks like the surplice. That's now made into albs too, and then you have to wear an amice.
You would have to wear an amice in that case.
Instead of the old-fashioned tie ones, which are still made as well too.
Now, when we were ordained in 1988, we were wearing the more traditional ones with the amice and the tie, but there also was the advent of the muumuu alb. That was
the muumuu alb, yes.
It was made out of burlap. You look
just
like a big
as the
sack
regular
of potatoes.
fashion of the 60s and 70s and regular fashion went right down the
Yeah.
toilet. Liturgically, we also had to suffer through that.
The muumuu
and the
alb.
muumuu.
Yeah, muumuu alb and Velcro.
Tell them what the muumuu alb looked like.
You look like a big sack of potatoes, or
It was supposed to mimic a monastic
like
type
King
of-
Kamehameha and from Hawaii.
Right.
But fortunately, those are not as popular as before. And then, of course, the Velcro was invented, and again, that sort of got rid of the necessity of the cincture. But again, I like the symbolic value because again, that you need both of them coexist.
Especially, it's nice to say those prayers too, as
Yes.
as you're getting invested too. Unfortunately, our sacristies are like Broadway, that you don't have a lot of privacy. Hopefully one day I would be able to build a little pre-sacristy for us to recollect and get ready for Holy Mass, instead of the one that we use now, which is lots of, altar servers are going in and out, Eucharistic ministers are going in and out,
Mine was
deacons
smaller,
are going
though.
in and out. You don't have a really time to reflect, because it's nice to say those prayers, plus the prayer of intention. I'm saying this Mass with the intention, and to the Holy Sacrifice Mass united with all the holy sacrifices throughout the world. It's nice to really get into that spiritual mode as you're ascending the altar. So.
Okay, let's see now. We have one here for you.
Don't you want to also maybe talk about the bishop's other accoutrements?
Well, the bishop, besides, as Father Briganti mentioned, wears the alb like the priest. He wears the stole like the priest, cincture. Then he has, now he can wear the very thin dalmatic to show the fullness of the priesthood, and then the chasuble. And then he also wears his pectoral cross, which some bishops wear on the outside of their chasuble, some wear on the inside on top of their alb. He has this big pointed hat that we call the mitre. That goes back to the Old Testament.
Right.
If you look in the Old Testament, the high priest in the temple of Solomon, his hat that he wore, if you took the bishop's mitre and turned it on around just a slightly bit with the point where looking at it sideways, it would look just like a bishop's mitre turn. The bishop's mitre represents, has two main parts of it, represents what they, right now they don't say anything when they put it on the bishop's head, but in the ancient rite, the bishop would be told he's being crowned with the horns of both testaments, the New Testament and the Old Testament. And so when a bishop is made a bishop, he's consecrated and ordained, they put the mitre on top of his head, and it has two little, almost like mini stoles on the back of it. Again, that symbolizes the priesthood with his office as the chief shepherd. So he would wear the mitre. Now, some bishops in the extraordinary form, they have gloves that they would wear.
Before that, the mitre could also be in the 4 liturgical colors as well. But normally, most of them wear in the white.
Mostly white, some gold for big occasions, and then they can.
But they could wear red for confirmation,
yes.
and etc.
And some are very elaborate. I mean, I remember Cardinal Burke just got one in Denver, and it was a tall one. Okay, that was a solemn.
That's what you call a skyscraper.
It was very high.
You needed an elevator on that one. Yeah.
Now, I think it was the English Catholic Church, the Catholic Church in England, I should say, that developed a shorter mitre. That just goes. It was sort of like a fashion statement. And then the French and the Italians had taller ones, and they were more ornate. Some of them had what they call precious, semi-precious.
Like Pope
mitres.
Benedict XVI, if you see pictures of him, he wore very tall mitres and very ornate ones. They're beautiful, the symbol of his office. Pope Pius XII, Venerable Pius XII as well, wore, and Pope Paul VI in the beginning of his reign also wore a very ornate one too. But again, it's liturgical fashion style. It doesn't mean anything. But before you go on to the old vestments, there's one thing that you often see at variety shows when the person is not doing so well. They take the hook and then they ring you back into the backstage. Well, bishops have one too, but they don't use it in that way, though.
No, they could, but they don't. This is the crozier, the pastor's staff. It represents like a shepherd would in the field. He would have a stick that he would guide the sheep, and when necessary, give him a little poke. And when the bishop is consecrated and ordained to the episcopacy, after they put on the crozier, after they put on the mitre on top of his head, and they put the ring on his finger, he's given the staff, the pastoral staff. It's also called the crozier. And usually it has a big stick made out of metal or wood, and it has like a big hook at the end of it. And there was very strict rules in the old rite,
which way
you pointed, depending if you were in your jurisdiction, if you're not. Today it doesn't matter. Some don't even have a big hook on it. Some just have a complete pole. Some have the Pope. Originally was the only one that could carry a cross or crucifix on his crozier.
St. John Paul II had the famous cross that that you see on a lot of the papal rosaries that you can buy and things like that. It goes a little bit like this, and then
I got to actually hold John Paul's crozier. That's when Father Briganti held the book, as we mentioned in a previous episode, when his shoe got stuck.
But you have to look at the previous episode to get that story.
Yeah, we're not going to tip everything off there. Now, there's also a very little piece of esoterica here. The Pope is the only one that could carry a cross that had 3 bars on it. And just like the crown that the Pope used to wear, the triple tiara, he had 3 bars on his cross. The Patriarch or Metropolitan Archbishop could have 2 on there, and then the bishop could have 1. That was always a sign of one's rank in the episcopacy.
But papal tiara is a very interesting piece of. I wouldn't call it a vestment, so to speak, but maybe you can go, and it still could be used, by the way. It hasn't been suppressed or anything.
No,
right?
It's just that the last couple of popes just refused to use
John
it.
Paul II decided not to use it because John Paul I didn't use it. Pope
That's
Paul
right.
VI was the last one.
He's the last one to wear it.
And you can see that in Washington, D.C. at the
He took
National
it off
Shrine.
at the Vatican Council.
As Father Trujillo says, it looks like a torpedo. It wasn't a very...
Yeah, the one in Washington.
I think the Archdiocese of Milan, that's where he was Cardinal Archbishop, gave it as a gift.
It was brushed aluminum, and
Yeah.
it had sort of the Jetson effect. They had the 3 rings on there. But when you go to Rome and go to the Vatican Museum,
There's some gorgeous
you see
ones,
some
yeah.
gorgeous. And again, the Pope's crown developed over especially the early Middle Ages, because the Pope was considered not only the head of the church but supreme ruler of the world, because the Pope was the one who would crown the Holy Roman Emperor. And so a king would wear a single crown. The Holy Roman Emperor had a double crown, but only the Pope had the triregnum with the 3
And it coincided
the 3
with
crowns.
his 3 aspects of his role.
Yes, because he was the judge, he's the lawgiver, and he's also the supreme teacher. And so his three munera are symbolized in those 3 levels of his tiara. Now, again, it's not been suppressed that a pope cannot use one if he didn't want to, but the custom has developed since Pope Paul VI. And in fact, when the Pope was crowned Pope, it was called his coronation, since the time of Pope John Paul I.
Because they are considered a sovereign in their own country.
He is the supreme head of state for
Yeah.
Vatican City. But since they don't accept the crown anymore on their own volition, they just refer to the Pope's installation as opposed to his coronation. But you can go on YouTube and see some of these, like I think it was Pope Pius XII and Pope John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, and even St. Paul VI. You can see the ceremony where they were crowned, and it's just as spectacular as when the King or Queen of England or any other country were coronated.
Now you wanted to talk about 3 other things: the gloves, the bushkins, and the booties.
Yes.
Those are 3 interesting titles there, right?
There you go. Could be a new
This again,
series.
more in the extraordinary form. Although Archbishop Wayland of fond memory used to wear it in the ordinary form too.
Yes,
So
and
it's not
You can
exclusive.
still wear the gloves would match the color of the chasuble and the color of sometimes the color of the
and they would wear it up
the
to
mitre.
what point?
And again, it was a symbol of office. And the bishops who wore the gloves, and the ones they had very ceremonial ones that were very thick, almost like what you'd wear in wintertime,
Or riding
very
gloves.
ornate.
Yeah.
But then they had thinner ones they would wear. A lot of the bishops had 2 different rings, because the one ring that they would wear most of the time fit on their finger. But if they wore the glove and the ring on top of it, obviously it wouldn't fit. So they had a separate ring for that, or they had a little device that opened and closed so that you could adjust the size of the ring. I saw that at the Vatican Museum.
What is the ring symbols?
The symbol of the ring is that you represent Jesus, who is the bridegroom, and you're married to a church, who is your bride. Just like nuns would typically wear a wedding band the day that they took their vows, they wear a wedding dress. They would wear a wedding ring the rest of their life as a sister, because they were brides of Christ. The bishop, as the head of the local church, successor of the apostles, his ring represents that he is also the groom, because he represents Jesus, who's married to the church, the bride. Now, in the old Code of Canon Law in 1917, priests could not wear rings unless you had a doctorate of sacred theology. In 83 Code, that was not included. So today, if you see a priest wearing a ring, it does not mean de facto that he is a bishop.
Or a wannabe.
Or wannabe. There's a big club of that, okay? But now, you will never see a priest wearing a cross, okay? The pectoral cross is reserved only to the priest, only to the bishop and to the pope. That's your Byzantine. If you're Eastern Catholic, they'll wear a cross, and their bishop wears like a holy medallion, okay?
Now we want to know about bushkins.
The bushkins, yes. The bushkins were a foot covering that the bishop would wear.
See, because no street clothes was supposed to be shown.
They
in
covered
the sacred
everything
liturgy.
because they wanted to accentuate that this was the sacred. You came from the profane world into the sacred. And all these ornamental things, again, showed the solemnity of what was being done. It wasn't because of the person themselves, but when the bishop was there, this was considered an apostolic high mass, high liturgy, and the sacraments that were being celebrated, like confirmation or the Holy Eucharist. And so the solemnity of what was being done was celebrated by what the bishop wore. And so it wasn't so much to say, oh, here's a big shot, but that these things were done particularly to remind the people who saw that, wow, this is something different. We don't see this every day.
And then the shoes.
And then they would also wear, besides the covering for their feet, elaborate coverings that would, I wouldn't necessarily call them socks because they still wore socks underneath that. But these things called the bushkins were like slippers, okay? And again, you don't see that too often anymore, but they wear them in the
and there would be a special shoe too, and that also would be color coordinated.
Yes,
too.
and they had color. Yeah. They had different colors, and then even the, some of them had buckles. You had to be a bishop to have a buckle on your shoe. There was a lot of if you go, there's Externals in the Catholic Church, I think it's called. There was a book that explains all these things in great detail. So if you're ever playing Catholic Trivial Pursuit, that book would be very valuable to you.
Now, I just want to say, you probably, Camille, you asked this question, you probably got more of an answer than you thought. Even we thought a whole show,
a can of worms
developed for this. But it's interesting, though, because it's, we're sacramental. We're also tangible people, in the Catholic Church. So all our wonderful vestments and things, they all have meaning behind it. We just don't have it because they look nice, and that's why they're really a good theology lesson, as we look at the visible or the tangible part of that. As we get to the conclusion of this, Father Matthew and I would like to sing happy birthday to Father John Trujillo.
Uh-oh.
So we're going to wish him his 58th birthday today. So, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Father Trujillo. Happy birthday to you, and many more.
I thought there'd be a cake reeled
That's later. Cake is later. It's coming.
That's later.
But again, we have plenty more liturgical questions. A lot came in on that. So please, if you're interested in sending a question in, you'll see the email address, and we do entertain them. So please feel free to write your liturgical, moral, doctrinal, or even canonical questions. We'll be happy to entertain them for you on these special episodes. As Mother Angelica always concluded her show, she reminded that the network just doesn't pay for itself, but it needs support from viewers like yourself. And so in this time of the quarantine, we're not getting our regular collections in our parishes. And so if you can remember us between your electric and gas bill, put your weekly contribution in. You can either put it in by the mail, drop it off at the rectory offices between 10 and 1. There is a bin out there. Or bring it to the church. Church is open 9 to 5. You can put your offertory collection there. Or you can go online. Preferably it would be to go electronically, so this way it's sure every week it takes out of your account. And now you can even do it by text. Whatever ways that you do, it's appreciative of your sacrificial offering to the church. And it's one of the 6 commandments of the church is to support your parish. So we definitely need that support. And now, as we come to the conclusion, we'd like to give you our priestly blessing.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
God bless you until we see you tomorrow or the next time.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Web of Faith 2.1 and a half. Please join us again tomorrow at 5 p.m. as Father John Trujillo and Father Kenneth Briganti answer more of your questions on Catholicism. Until then, God bless you and God love you.